Today's daf is daf kuf ches. I'll start with Tanur Rabbanon on the third line. This is where we left off yesterday. Ezu miyun. What constitutes miyun? We're going to have a lot of discussions about the exact formulation. Amra, she said, efshi biploni baili. I'm not interested in so-and-so, my husband, or even if she doesn't mention his name, but rather she says, efshi bikidushin shekichuni imi v'achai. I don't want to have any part of the marriage that my mother or my brothers married me off. That is a maisa miyun. She was memayin in the kiddush. Yes, arcane even further. Something that's even further removed from the actual expression of miyun. Rav Yudah filu yosheves ba'piryon. She's sitting in that chair, that beautiful chair that's designated for the kala at the time of chuppah. And voleches mi beis avila beis baila. And they're carrying her in that chair, that apiryon, from the house of her father to the house of her husband, to set up the chuppah there, the umrah, and she declares, efshi b'ploni baili. I'm not interested in so-and-so, my husband. You would think that she's not really serious about what she's saying, because why is she going into the chuppah? But nevertheless, zeu miyun. She said enough to qualify as miyun. Yes, I can even further. Amar Rav Yehuda, filu hayu orchim mesubim bebeis baila. There were guests in the house of her husband. The omedesu mashkalem. She is hosting them. The amralem, and she says to them, efshi beploni baili. I'm not interested. I don't want this marriage with my husband. And he mentions his name in that case. Harei umiyu. So the Chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda is that even though she was not in front of a bezdin, there were no witnesses here, and the guests at the table are not really functioning as witnesses. They're not interested in notifying the Baal that she was Mima'enes. They don't want to play that role. Nevertheless, the miyun is chal, it's valid. Yes, al kain omer Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Afilu shigra baila etzel chenvani. She made the shlep to go to the store and buy something for her husband. Lahavi lo chefetz mishalo, to bring him some sort of an object and retrieve it for him. The Omra, and she says to the Chenvani, efshi beploni baili, even though she was only b'ma'enes in front of one person. And we could say that maybe she doesn't have a serious intention of miyun. She just says, she's a little bit upset and frustrated by the fact that her husband sent her with such a tercha all the way to bring a chefetz back to him. Nevertheless, miyun kol be said. This constitutes. We learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos Omer, kol tinokos she'ena yechol lishmar kiddusha ena tzricha l'mayim. We don't recognize and validate the issues of a child if she is not mature enough to know what kiddushin is all about. Like, for example, let's say he gives her money for kiddushin, she doesn't even know what to do with the money. She doesn't protect it. We paskin that a ketana that eina yodas lishmar kiddusha, the Rabbanu were not mesakin ishus and kiddushin on her behalf, and therefore such a marriage would not require miyun. Tana, we learned in a brayso, ketana shalom miyana. She never said verbally a declaration of miyun that she doesn't want her husband, but the umda v'nisei, she went ahead and got married to someone else. Mishum Rav Yehuda ben Beseira amru nisueha hein meuneha. The fact that she got married to someone else is a public indication or demonstration that she wants to be mima'enes. So she doesn't need a formal statement or declaration of miyun bepeh to say efshi b'baili. It's enough that she does a maisa that's a gili das and clearly indicates evidence that she's not interested in a husband. Iboilahu, the Gemara vacillates about how to understand Rav Yehuda ben Beseira. Niskadshamai, the case that was mentioned in the brayso was Amda v'nises le'ish acher. What about Amda v'niskadsha le'ish acher? Did Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira carefully indicate that only In the case of Nisuela, she goes into the Rishus of the second one for Nisuin. And once she goes into his Rishus of the second husband, clearly she's not interested in the Kedushin to the first. Or shall we say, whether or not she enters into the Nisuin of the second husband, or even just Kedushin, that's enough to qualify as Miyun. The Miyun is a Gili Das that she doesn't want a husband. So when the Tana mentions Nisuela, it's Lav Dafka. It would mean even Kedushin. Tashma, I'll prove it to you from a Bryce. Tana Shalom Miyun of Yomdav Niskadsha, Mishum Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, Amru Kiddusha Hein Hein Miyun now. So it's even Kiddush. That's explicit. Iboilu, the Gemara vacillates. Pligi Rabbana laid Rav Yehuda ben Beseira low. Either Rabbana reject Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, or the Tana just mentioned his name because he heard it from that Tana, Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, but in fact, it was a universally accepted opinion. Imtin Talom Pligi. I don't know whether there is an argument or not, but let's just theoretically, hypothetically grant you that the Rabbana rejected Rav Yehuda. What was the Shita Rabbana? B'Kiddushin. They rejected Rav Yehuda in the case where she was Mekabelas Kiddushin, but if she was Nises, then certainly they would agree to Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, even the Rabbana would agree, that once she enters into the Rishus, the Sheni, that's Miyun, o Afilu ben Esuin. Or did the Rabbana reject Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, even in the case where she entered into the Rishus through Nesuin of the second husband? The Rabbana hold that Miyun is not enough to have a Gili Das. She needs Lahotzi Miyun B'Piv. She has to say the magic words, Yefshi B'Poni B'Ilu. V'yimtim Tzaloma Pli Yafilu B'Nesuin. And if you will go to the extreme and assume, hypothetically, that Rabbana rejected Rav Yehuda ben Beseira even when she was Nises, halacha kemoso to be paskin like Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, that whether or not she was Nises liacher or Niskach liacher, it's considered miyun. Oh, ain't halacha kemoso, but rather halacha is chachamin. And miyun requires an explicit miyun, a verbal declaration. The efshi b'ayli plum, the imtim salomar. And if you'll say that halacha kemoso, that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, how far do we go in that psak? B'nesuin, we accept his opinion halacha if she was nesua to the sheni, or afilu b'kedushin, even with kedushin alon. Tashma, Rabbi Yehuda, Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, halacha michlal de pligi. We see by implication that the Rabbana rejected Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. And Shmuel seems to say that Allah Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in all cases, whether it's Kedushin or Nesud, he doesn't qualify it. And it's mashma that the Rabbanan would argue against Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and reject him in all cases, even in the case of Nesuin. But we pass like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in every case. So Gemara says, Akati Tiboilach, we haven't finished with all Asfekis, and there still is another suffix to be taught, and that is, so we're going to still ask the following question, a suffix in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, in terms of the efficacy of miyun in a case where she accepted kedusha from someone else. Is it afilu dahavi nesiva meikara? Did Rabbi Yehuda make that statement even if she was fully married to the first husband with nesuin? Or duma mikadcho, perhaps when she was niskadcha liacher, that's called miyun only in the case where the original marriage with the first husband was kedusha. And since she was never fully in the rishus of the first husband, therefore she can break away from the first husband with a miyun kal, a relatively lightweight miyun. But if she was already in a suah, fully married to the first husband, in his rishus legamre, then it's not enough to have a miyun kal of Gilead Das, but rather you would require, even according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, an explicit miyun, a declaration. Oshma, let's be posted the suffix, the Kalse, the Avdon Imorud. The Kala, meaning the daughter-in-law of Avdon, a scholar by the name of Avdon, and she was a young girl, and she was Moredis Bebaila, and she didn't want to have any relationship with him, any intimacy with him. Shader Rebbe, and Rebbe sent Zugid Rabbanon, a pair of scholars, Levivdekinu, to find out what's going on with this girl. Is she really a Moredes? Or maybe she changed her mind. She went back to living with him. Amri Luhu Nishay. And when these scholars came around to sort of snoop around and investigate, the women told them that Chazu Gavraichu Dikaasi. Hanoshim Sheyashvu Sham, they said to the Ketana, take a look that your husband is now coming. Amr Lahu, and again, he has in plural because there were more than one Ketanos. And her response was, Nehevi Gavraichu Didchu. Halavai, that these would be our husbands, meaning your husband's not my husband. Amar Rebbe, Ein Lecha Miyun Gedola Mizeh. When she declared, this Ketana, that Halavai, that these guys would be your Bailan, not mine. That's a miyun. My love, shouldn't we assume that Nesiba, even though she was already Nesua to the son of Avadon? And yet the implication here and the Gili Milsa is enough to qualify as miyun. Lo, the Gemara says no proof. Tavi Mekadsha Kiddushin, maybe she was only Mekudeshes to the son of Avdon. But La Aloch of Aloch Krab Yudah ben Beseira, Mafilu ben Nesuin Dekama. Even if she was already married as an Asua to the first husband. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Ein Maisik Tana Klum. She's like a mafuta. And therefore, Bas Yisrael to a Kohen would not be able to eat Truma. Bas Kohen Yisrael would eat Truma. Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, Chizarnu al Kol Tzadi Chachamim. We investigated all the various opinions and views and rulings of the Chacham. V'lo matzinu adam sheishra midosav b'ktana Rabbi Eliezer. We didn't find anyone who accepted the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer with regard to the status of Nisui Ketana. Shasa'a Rabbi Eliezer kimitayeles imo b'chatzer. He reduced the marriage of a Ketana to that of a Mafuta, as if to say that her Nesuin is not Kiddush, it doesn't generate Isha, she's like Mafuta, she's like a woman who was seducted and seduced, and she never really left her husband, her father's Rishus. Omedes Micheko, Vitoveles, Viokeles Vitrumala Erev. Let's say she's a Bas Kohen, married to Yisrael, and she leaves the closeness, the intimacy of her husband. She goes to mikvah because of Tashmish Amita, and she eats truma at night, going back to her father's rishus. And Shmuel says that this is a strange kind of halacha, that the Chachamim would not relate to the Nesuin as a Nesua. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein Maisek Tana Klum, Ve'ein Baila Zakoi, Lo B'mitziasa, Lo B'maisiyadeh, Lo B'afaras Nedorev, Ve'en Yosha, Ve'en Metamilo. There is no kinyan ishus with regard to Nisui Ketana. And the Baal has no rights in the context of such a marriage, because it's not really a marriage, it's not a kinyan, neither to her found objects, nor to her wages, nor to be Mayfair Hanadorim, or to inherit if she dies, or if he's a Kohen, and she dies, he cannot be mitami to her to bury her. She's not Ishto. And yet, in one dimension, Rabbi Eliezer agrees that she is Ishto, this Ketana, Ella Shetzricha Miyun. When she wants to exit from his life and terminate that relationship, and she needs Miyun. Gemara is going to ask a question. I mean, if she's not Ishta, why does she need miyun? Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Baila Zakai b'mitziyasu ma'asiyadeh, even though the Ishus is only the Rabbanan, but a Hefker Bezin Hefker, and the Rabbanan gave him as her husband the rights to Mitzia, to Ma'asiyadayim, to Yerusha, to First Norea, Umetamila. Klol Shedavar Eki Ishtol Chol Davar, Ela Sheyotza b'miyun. But she can terminate that Ishus with miyun. I'm not sure in that case whether she collects a ksuba. Omar Rebbe, Nirin Divri Rabbi Eliezer, mi Divri Rabbi Yeshua. I prefer Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. She Rabbi Eliezer hishra midosov b'ketana, the Rabbi Yeshua chalak. Rabbi Eliezer was very consistent that the maisa of a ketana in marriage is not worth a dime. And therefore a husband has no rights in the context of marriage. And therefore I understand why miyun is moil. But Rabbi Yeshua, on the other hand, he's contradicting himself. He's not consistent. On one hand, he says that the Rabbanan established Nesuin for a ketana as a full-fledged kinyan. And she's like Ishto l'chol davar. And therefore a husband has all the rights of a husband to a wife, vis-a-vis his wife in marriage. So why does he say that she goes out b'miyun? She should require a get to terminate the issues. The Gemara rejects Rebbe. My cholak. Why do you see Rebbe in Rabbi Yeshua that he makes a distinction that is inconsistent? And if it's because he ishto iti by get, and that's your problem and your objection to Rabbi Yeshua, then why are you so excited about Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer nami, ilav ishtohi, mi nami lo tiboy. Why does Rabbi Eliezer require me? So why did Rebbe prefer Rabbi Yeshua? Ella, the Gemara rejects it. Ella b'chdi tipa. As if to ask a question on Rebbe, on his kash and his objection to Rabbi Eliezer. What do you want? You wanted to just go out without anything? And even if the Baal, according to Rabbi Eliezer, has no schus in his wife, nevertheless, she has a status as a nesua. I mean, they're living together as husband and wife and they have intimacy and so forth. It doesn't make sense that such a relationship could just terminate without any miyun, without any formal declaration. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that he as a husband has his chus gemura, then it would be logical that she would require a get. And that's why Rebbe prefers Rabbi Eliezer more than Rabbi Yeshua. So it seems that Lamaskana, the Gemara actually accepts the kind of Rebbe against Rabbi Yeshua, that it's not mistaber that they established this Ishus with all the exclusives of Ishus, and yet she can go out and mean. But the Yushalmi, who asks this question, does not bring the words of Rabbi Yeshua, but mistama, how is it possible that he's zoche b'maisi adem mitziasa first nedarim and she's mama'enes? And the Yerushalmi activates a principle to answer this by saying, Heim amru ve'heim am. In other words, Yerushalmi understood that there's a possibility that even though the Rabbanan were masakin a full-fledged ishus, nevertheless they were masakin a yitzia b'miyun. So although the Bavli holds that Gili Das is miyun, and it doesn't make any sense that if they established, like Rabbi Yeshua Shita, Kiddushin Gemurin, that she should go out with Gili Das. But Yerushalmi holds that miyun is an akira like a get. It's not just a Gili Das. And therefore, even though they established Ishus Gemura, she can still go out with miyun like she goes out with the get. Rabbi Lezman Yaakov Homer Kol Akova Shehimina Ish Ki Ilu Hi Ishto. Kol Akova She'eno Mina Ish Ki Ilu Eno Ishto. Well, what does this mean? The Gemara is going to go through two interpretations of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Hechi dami akava shehimina ish. What does it mean that there's a barrier to the Nesuin because of him? And in such a case, ki'ilu hi ishto, that's the words of those are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Akava she'ena min ish, if the impediment inhibiting Nesuin is not from him, then she's not ishto. What does that mean? If while she was married to him, tav'uha linase elav, he wanted to marry her and upgrade the marriage from kedushin to nesuin, and she refused. V'amra machmas ploni baili. So tav'uha is not the Baal himself, but rather someone else wants to marry her. She refuses because she's already married. Zuhi akava shehimina ish, which means that she revealed her das, that she's happy with the kedushin, and therefore she's considered his wife, and she needs miyun. So in other words, the cause of her remaining in the marriage is her husband, meaning she feels satisfied and connected with her husband. And therefore she needs miyun. If another person, a suitor, tries to marry her, and he's not an appropriate marriage partner, and she indicates that she wouldn't mind marrying someone else, it's just that this guy is a zhlav, she doesn't want to marry him. Zui akava she'ena min ish. This is not an akava based on the fact that she's attached to her husband. Her present marriage to her first husband is not the reason why she's not marrying someone else. It's just that she didn't find anyone else who is good enough for her. So she's really indicating that she's not happy with her marriage. And in this case, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says she doesn't need miyun, even though she never used the official formula of miyun, the Yefshi bebaili or Yefshi bekedusha kenshani imi v'yachi. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that it's enough that we have a gili das, that she's not happy in this marriage, and that is the reason again why she rejected the other opportunity was only because he's low hug. Had he been hugging, she would have been happy to marry him. So that's the first round of explanation of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now we have Abayi bar Ovin, Rabbi Chanina bar Ovin, the Amrit Tavayu, another alternative way of understanding Rabbi Eliezer. She was a ketana v'lo miyanobo. She doesn't want to go out, but her Baal wants to get rid of her. So again, she wasn't mema'enes. The breakup of the marriage was his. She would have been happy to continue the marriage, but he gave her a get. And therefore, what's the result? As we said, that akava shimena ish kilu hi ishto, who asa b'krovoseva, he asa b'krova. We're going to apply the principle of grusha. She is enjoined from marrying his relatives, and he from her relatives. Upsala mina kahuna, that get makes her into a grusha as far as kahuna is concerned, as if she was an isha gedola, even though she's really only a ketana. But mianabo zui akova she'eno mina ish. He didn't give her a get. She was mima'enespo, and therefore she is oker the kedusha l'mafreya v'umuta b'krova seva he muteres b'krova lo pasla min hakuna. So the Gemara raises the following objection to this interpretation that was presented by Abaye, that Akava mina each means he gave her a get, and Akava mina each means she was Memanis. Hakani Lekaman, we have these very identical halachas codified in a Mishnah coming up very soon. Amama enes beish, hu muter b'krova seva, he muteres b'krova, v'lo p'sola min akuna. However, Baal nasan lo get, who also b'krova seva, he asur b'krova, u'p'sola min akuna. So how's it possible to say that the Mishnah here, quoting Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, is presenting the identical view that's presented in the Mishnah as a stoma? And the Gemara answers, Peruche Kamafarich. The Mishnah as a stoma is coming to explain the ambiguous words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And now we'll see the Mishnah that we just referred to inside. Hamave'enis be'ish hu muter b'krovosea, he muteres b'krov lo p'sola min akuna, mian is oker than a sulam afreya, and makes her into mafuta be'alma. There's no Isser on the krovos in the case of mafuta. But nasan lo get, who also b'krovoseva, he has to b'krov p'sola min akuna, like any other grush. Nasan lo get with zero. Oh, now we get to the heavy sugya for today. He was married to a ketana, he gave her a get, and then he remarried her, which he's allowed to do because she was not married in the interim to anyone else. And then miyanova. Again, she's still a ketana. So what happens now? Do we recognize her as a grusha? Or do we say that there's miyun? And then afkamina is going to be the nises li'acher and almanis garsha muteres lachzolo. If she gets married to a second husband after the miyun to her first husband, is she allowed to go back and be remarried by her first husband when her second husband dies or gives her a get? Shall we say muteres lachzolo, even though from her original nisuin she got a get, which would generate an Isser of Maxir Grushos Eliachas and Nises? Or should we say no, that she went out of her marriage relationship with her first husband a second round with Miyun, and therefore this is not Maxir Grushos? It's as if he was Maxir her after Miyun, which we said was Mutter. So is the Miyun sort of Mavatal the get? And that's what it seems from this Mishnah, because it says Muteris Lachzor, and she's not considered a Machzir Grushos. Miano Bo B'chsira, and he was Machzir after Miyun. Nosan Lo gets the exact opposite order. The sequence is the opposite. Instead of starting with get and ending with miyun, we start with miyun and we end with get. After the get, this is already Machzir Grushoso Misha Nises, because she got a get from the first husband, like any grusha, and on that get she got married to someone else. He's not allowed to remarry. And even though there was a miyun on the first round, nevertheless, since in the second and last round Yotzim Imena beget, she becomes Machzir Grushoso Misha Nises.